A former veteran NBC reporter has issued a scathing resignation letter going after the media and especially his former employer for being on the side of endless war. Now, the letter published in full by CNN on Wednesday by the longtime news reporter William Bill Arkin, who, by the way, was not only a reporter, but he was also a commentator and a military analyst for the channel, went after the corporate media for their embrace of endless war, and of course about the military-industrial complex that drives that reporting. Now, I want to give you some excerpts from this resignation letter. Now, in one passage he wrote that, quote, "Long before Trump and the deep state became an expression, I produced one ginormous investigation, Top Secret America, for the Washington Post, and I wrote a nasty book, American Coup, about the creeping fascism of Homeland Security." Now, again, a lot of that is pre-Trump, and we can see from the Obama administration and the Bush administration that these presidents basically expanded Homeland Security. They expanded the military-industrial complex. They expanded spying into American citizens. And no one in the media, at least no one in corporate media, would ever stand up to them. In fact, they would continue to go along with the narrative of, no, what we need this stuff to be safe. So don't worry, listen to your government overlords, and they will keep you safe as long as you continue to funnel money into the military and support everything that they do. Now, he continues in this op-ed by saying, in this resignation letter, that looking back now, they were both harbingers for what President Obama and then Trump faced in terms of largely failing to make any sort of enduring change. Now, you guys remember Hope and Change. Look, Obama ran on Hope and Change. He ran on closing Guantanamo. He ran on drawing down the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Didn't happen. We continued the wars in the Middle East. And we continued a lot of the bombings and expanded bombings in Africa and places like Syria. And so our military involvement continues all over the globe. There was no change. And look, there was not a lot of change from President Trump so far as well. But there are some, of course, exceptions. But we'll get into that. Now, here's the thing. On Syria, as I just mentioned. Now, defense contractors want to stay in Syria. Of course, they want us to continue bombing operations in Syria. They want us to continue just in Syria, keeping those 5,000 troops. And so, basically keeping us involved in that conflict. Now, to give Trump some credit, he does want to leave. But he continues to be surrounded by people who are in the military-industrial complex, in the military establishment, that are wanting, oh, you better not do that. You better not leave. And so, of course, they've gotten him to change his timetable just a little bit. Now, to which, of course, his desire to leave Syria altogether has gotten him incredible pushback, especially from corporate media outlets like NBC. Now, on that, Arkin writes, quote, "I find it disheartening that we do not report the failures of the generals and national security leaders. I find it shocking that we essentially condone continued American bumbling in the Middle East and now Africa through our ho-hum reporting." Again, direct shot at the media for not calling out military leaders. And that's because the military itself is deeply pro-war. Just imagine if you were to come out against a general that did something wrong. Immediately, you would be called un-American. Why don't you support the troops? You got to support the troops no matter what they do. You got to support the troops. You got to support the generals. You have to support the American military machine, or else you are un-American and you want us to be overrun with terrorists. That's usually what they say. So, and of course, the media also says that, hey, we need to not go after these people. And while they're saying that, they also give them positions as policy analysts on their news stations. That's really important. Now, Arkin continues. He says, it was clear to me that NBC, like the rest of the news media, could no longer keep up with the world. Added to that was the intellectual challenge of how to report our new kind of wars where there are no real fronts and no actual measures of success. Now, that's absolutely right. There are no measures of success. Again, what happened to Mission Accomplished in Iraq? We had to literally get booted out of Iraq by the Iraqi government. And then, of course, we ended up going back in, to do counterterrorism and to fight, ISIS, which our intervention created in the first place. So, in reality, there is no exit. Because once you go in and you mess a place up, you can continually make the justification for coming back. Oh, look, we got to go back now. Because look at what happened. Look, we got ISIS now. We're going to have to deal with that. Then we're going to have to deal with Al-Qaeda. And we're going to have to deal with this and this and that. It's never ending. Now, he continues. He says, to me, there's also a larger problem along with those. Though they produce nothing that resembles actual safety and security, the national security leaders and generals we have allowed to do their thing unmolested. Despite being at war, no great wartime leaders or visionaries are emerging. There's not a soul in Washington who can say that they have won or stopped any conflict. And though there might be the beloved perfumed princes in the form of the Petraeus and Wes Clarks, or the so-called warrior monks like Mattis and McMaster, we've had more than a generation of national security leaders who sadly and fraudulently have done little of consequences. You know why? Because winning wars doesn't make money. Ending conflict or preventing conflict doesn't make defense contractors money. And it also doesn't make the media money. Now, Arkin continues, he says, and yet, despite those failings, we and others embrace them, even the highly partisan formers who masquerade as analysts. We do so ignoring the empirical truth of what they have wrought. There is not one country in the Middle East that is safer today than it was 18 years ago. Indeed, the world becomes ever more polarized and dangerous. Damn. So, again, harsh critique, but absolutely on point. And again, coming from somebody who was an insider at NBC. Now, look, he was an insider. That doesn't necessarily mean he always agreed. In fact, behind the scenes, he was always fighting with NBC. But we'll get to that. First, he said, quote, as perpetual wars become accepted as a given in our lives, I'm proud to say that I've never deviated my argument at NBC or at my newspaper gigs that terrorists will never be defeated until we better understand why they are driven to fighting. And I have maintained my central view that air power, in its broadest sense, including space and cyber, is not just the future, but the enabler and the tool of war today. So that's a note, right, to everyone who believes, or anyone who believes, oh no, it's not war, we're just doing airstrikes. No. Airstrikes are a form of warfare. They kill people just as well, probably actually a lot better than a soldier on foot. Not to mention drones also are considered air warfare. And they're incredibly effective at killing people, especially innocent people, as we have shown with our drone signature strikes. And the fact that if you look, a lot of our airstrikes have killed multitudes, scores of innocent people. So keep that in mind, right? Now, as I said, he goes into being a difficult guy, right? According to his colleagues or according to himself, speaking self-deprecatingly, of course. But what's interesting about that is how he views himself as that way because of his anti-war stances. So somehow being anti-war is actually really difficult as a member of corporate media. But here's the thing. He's been right on a lot of issues. And I'm going to go through some of those. For example, Iraq, right? He was one of the few that said, no, I don't believe that there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We're not going to find any, We haven't found any. He doesn't have any. So we have launched a war, or we're planning to launch a war into Iraq that will be absolutely useless and worthless and cost American lives and taxpayer money. I am not in favor of that. In fact, he quote, remembers fondly presenting that conclusion to an incredulous NBC editorial boards. So he's trying to say, he was saying to NBC, dude, we should not go into Iraq. There's no weapons of mass destruction. There's no proof of that. Or why are we going to cheerlead for a war that was caused under false pretenses? Again, weapons of mass destruction. That's the whole supposed reason we went into Iraq in the first place. There were no weapons of mass destruction. We were the weapon of mass destruction. The United States. Look at what happened in Iraq after we invaded. Yes, Saddam was a strong man. Doesn't matter. Right? We went in. We wrecked everything. We created ISIS. They didn't attack us on 9/11. And it was actually people from Saudi Arabia. 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. They had nothing to do with the attack on the United States. So, but again, the NBC's position was, oh no, the government tells us there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Therefore, there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We must report that as the absolute truth because the government would never, ever lie to us about war. Right. See how that turned out. Now, he also said that while he argued endlessly with MSNBC about all things national security for years, while also poking at the conventional wisdom of everyone from Matthews to Hockenberry, he feels as if he failed to convey this larger truth about the hopelessness of our way of doing things, and is especially disheartened to watch NBC and much of the rest of the news media somehow become a defender of Washington and the system. He also noted that NBC, after Trump's election, began emulating the national security state itself. Busy and profitable, no wars won, but the ball is kept in play. And as I mentioned, that ball is very lucrative. Now, he also says that under Trump, the national security establishment has gained dangerous strength. He says, quote, now it is ever more autonomous and practically impervious to criticism. He also argues that NBC has become somewhat lost in its own verve, proxies of boring moderation and conventional wisdom, defender of the government against Trump, cheerleader for open and subtle threat-mongering, in love with procedure and protocol over all else, including results. And summarizing his disagreements with the pro-war positions commonly used by the network under the Trump administration, Arkin says, quote, for me, I realized how out of step I was when I looked at Trump's various bumbling intuitions. His desire to improve relations with Russia, to denuclearize North Korea, to get out of the Middle East, to question where we are fighting in Africa, even in his attacks on the intelligence community and the FBI. Now that's interesting. So he is basically going to, yes, defend some of Trump's positions. And I absolutely think that he is correct. Now, let me read that for you. He said, of course, he is an ignorant and incompetent imposter. And yet I'm alarmed at how quick NBC is to mechanically argue the contrary, to be in favor of policies that just spell more conflict and more war. Really? We shouldn't get out of Syria? We shouldn't go for the bold move of denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula? Even on Russia, though we should be concerned about the brittleness of our democracy that is so vulnerable to manipulation, do we really yearn for the Cold War? And don't even get me started with the FBI. What? We now lionize this historically destructive institution. Damn, dude. Again, over and over, the hits keep coming, and he is absolutely correct on all of this stuff. And again, he's not the only one who has seen this going on. I've been in favor of these ideas, right? Pulling out of Syria, getting out of the Middle East. We need to get out of these wars. They're ridiculous. Making peace, denuclearizing North Korea. And look, I was in favor of the Korea talks with Kim Jong-un. What's sad is that Trump, again, the administration is so incompetent that they couldn't actually get a real deal together. And that was my hope, is that they could actually get a real deal together and that North Korea would denuclearize. But unfortunately, again, it didn't happen. At least not at this point. I still have hope that we can, right? And now the interesting part that he points out is that even if Trump were to do that, and that would be amazing, and I'm in favor of that diplomacy, if you were to get North Korea to actually denuclearize, the default position for NBC and a lot of the corporate media would be to criticize Donald Trump for doing so. Because the media is against Trump. And so he is absolutely right when he says that the media is 100% against him. Unless Trump has a pro-war position. And of course, we can go back to Brian Williams, who when Trump was launching this attack against Syrian air bases, these 52 missiles, he said, well, that was the day that Trump became presidential. So if you were in favor of war, then the media will heap praise and they will laud you for it. But if you were in favor of peace, if you're in favor of ending these conflicts, then the media would automatically be 100% against you. It is a sad situation. A very sad situation. Again, here's the thing. I mentioned before where there were articles when Trump announced that he would be pulling out of Syria. Again, a policy that I agree with. That there were articles out there that were slamming him for doing so, right? Now, that proves, again, anything that's against endless war, they're going to automatically oppose. And that is a big problem because the media is supposed to be objective, right? They're supposed to be objective. They're supposed to tell you the truth. They're not supposed to take a side or be against something because, oh, well, obviously the president that we don't like happens to be against that. So, or happens to be for a position, so we automatically have to be against it so we can oppose. That's ridiculous. That's not being objective. And you're not doing your job, especially if you're cheerleading for endless conflicts. So, and that's the problem that we have, is we have a media complex that right now is going hand in hand with the military. They are promoting militarism. They're promoting imperialism, all while doing stenography for the government. They're not holding the powers that be accountable for their actions, which is why I think we need a media revolution. We need a media that is not corporate media. We need independent media that will report on this. Now, this guy, again, worked for NBC. He's a veteran reporter, and he's always been kind of a thorn in the side of NBC, and even through his protestations and his work, he has not been able to get through because that entire industry is controlled by the money. We have to get a media institution that is divorced from corporate money, from defense contractor money, from oil money. Again, you turn on CNN, what do you see? You end up seeing ads for fossil fuels, for natural gas, and things like that. And that's why, again, we need that independent media that is free from that so that they can actually report objective reality instead of pro-corporate, pro-war propaganda. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.